5th as we wake up. It's been a new day and the bulk of the election results we've known, and maybe one important one we don't. We need to have a special guest that I will introduce later on. But right now, I'd like to introduce our two moderators, Robin Billups, the connector, Crystal Mitchell. Crystal, your show.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Glad to have you. Wow, it's been an exciting, nerve-biting, nerve-wracking, nail-biting 3 days. We have some great news for some of the propositions in our community that were local, but we also have some major drama going on the national stage. So we'll talk about that. I am very excited to have our guest today to help give us some insight on what's going on. As Stephen said, I am Crystal Mitchell. I am the co-director of Recycling Black Dollars. I'm a business coach in the community. I as well host another show called The Business Zone with Crystal and Gilbert that broadcasts live every Friday afternoon. Stream live on Facebook and YouTube. And then this baby here, or this podcast, we're not quite sure what we're calling right now, but right now it's a webcast. It was designed to help our businesses survive through COVID, and now it's taking on a new persona, and that persona is how we will thrive on past where we are past COVID and into 2021 and getting our businesses back on track. And but with that, we bring individuals to you that will help you navigate through all the resources and where the money is and how we can come together collaboratively in the community. So this is a project with Recycling Black Dollars, the VBA, Vermont Sloss, and a number of our community-based organizations. I am one that my utopia will be one day that we will all work together as one, using one voice to move the needle for our community, and our primary focus will be the Black community first, and then adding on the brown community as we move forward. So thank you for attending. I'll continue to share and invite other people. And with that, I want to welcome my co-host, Ms. Robin Billups. Our producer co-host is Mr. Stephen Turner. He represents the BBA. So he'll talk about that in a minute, and all the guests that are our regular guests that are here. So Ms. Robin, turning it over to you.
Good morning, guys. Again, here we are, days after the election. Well, I take that back. We're in election season, just leave it like that. And hopefully by the end of the week, we'll have some final results. I'm excited about our guest today, specifically because I spent a lot of time in banking. I'm well aware of this organization, and the mission and the vision of this organization truly aligns with what this weekly briefing is about, to inform, to engage, and to spread our wings so that we all have a platform and an opportunity to speak. This organization in particular, I've actually sat before them, had to be adjudicated, and got myself sliced and diced. But in doing that, I became a better banker. I became a better professional, and so I'm excited that the leadership in a lot of these organizations, and I don't mean any offense to men, but I am excited about the leadership where women are stepping up and stepping out and really the nurturers of our human life. And so again, we will always be inclusive. That's what I love about working with women, strong women especially. And again, I'm glad to see my friends from PCR who have been here weekly supporting us. And again, don't forget about the resources that they provide and connect with them. And then Bianca, a minority WBE business owner who is going to be sharing some information with us, depending on time today. But we've invited her to come and talk about her pivot and her historical starting of her business and her pivot. So, but today we're going to really zoom in on, this election and these propositions. And I think we have a subject matter expert here to share that with. So I'm going to turn it back over to Stephen so he can make the introduction. We can get started.
Since 1993, the Greenlining has been at the forefront of educating and advocating issues that affect our community, our Black and brown community. The Greenlining is fortunate to have at their helm as the president, Debra Mann. Prior to being the president of Greenlining, Debra was the managing director of Open Rise, as well as she was the chief development officer for California Alumni Association of UC Berkeley. She's from the farm, for those in the Bay Area, which is called Stanford. I mean, she did both her undergrad and graduate degree. Debra, please educate us and enlighten us.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm just really feel privileged when I can talk to those who are in the trenches and doing the work. So I want to just say up front that it's not my intention to make folks uncomfortable, but I'm going to bring up some facts and some data that may make you think, but that may also propel you to do things to support our community. So sometimes this information, is pretty stressful in this stressful time. So let me just frame for you a bit, right? When the Greenlining Institute, we're really focused on racial and economic equity. And we use the term equity, right? There's equality and then there's equity. And we use the term equity to refer to the proportional representation to have the same opportunities. Whereas equality is we all get the same amount. Proportional is based on where we are, either economically or socially. So we are really, Greenlining is really focused on racial and economic equity. So with that, let me just frame where we are in COVID. The poverty rates right now for Black folks is around 21%. And the income, the average white, so literally the Fed put out a report September 28th that went over like the wealth gap, right? The racial wealth gap. So it's fresh information that they do annually. And they reported that the median white wealth is about $188,000. $188,000, the median, right, wealth. And then the median wealth for the Black family is $24,000. So that's that ratio, right? That we're about 1/10 in our median wealth that then from white families. And if you think about that, the Federal Reserve classifies middle class at 48,000 to 145,000. And our median is 24,000. We are as a group not even classified as middle class, and lower middle class dips down to about 36,000. And reminder, we are as a group at $24,000. And then you've been hearing, through Bernie Sanders and his campaign, that top 1%. Well, just during COVID, there's only 640 but there's 640 billionaires that control about $3.6 trillion, right? So you got about 640 people controlling 3.6 trillion. Just during COVID, so just during March, they've made an additional $500 billion. So the wealth are getting wealthier and the gap is getting wider. In addition, if you look at the health disparity, that the disproportionate health disparity that now it is actually refreshing that we are disaggregating the information so that we see the disproportionate impact on people of color. And then we're seeing that, Black and brown folks are being impacted health-wise, and that we are also the essential frontline workers. And that currently 51% of Latino and Hispanics are employed in the low-wage jobs, which also feeds into the wealth gap. And then 50% of Black folks are in low-wage jobs. So what I'm trying to frame here about the racial equity is, the impact that it has and how small businesses and the workforce is key to how we will emerge and thrive coming out of it. So let me break the other two components. When I talk about income, I'm talking about what you need to get by. And when I talk about wealth, I'm talking about what you need to get ahead, right? So if we don't have wealth, and how wealth represents itself is also what's important, and what we're seeing the banks trying to address, right? That the banks have announced most recently these $1 billion investments. because the areas that are defining our wealth is intergenerational transfer. I don't know how many of you had your moms and dads and grandparents leave money and otherwise. So intergenerational transfer, home ownership, small business, education, and wage. And where you are in that whole diaspora of trying to accumulate or build wealth. And so for the Black community, the small business component and the home ownership is where some of these big banks have focused on. When I reached out to Steve, we had seen that JP Morgan Chase had announced a $30 billion program, Citibank had announced $1 billion program, and Bank of America was the first one in June to announce this $1 billion programs, right? And those are 3 of the top 6. Wells Fargo has since not jumped in quite yet at those levels. And one of the areas that those big banks are saying they're going to invest in our community, they're going to invest in home ownership, right? So they're having conversations, they're going to be engaged in down payment assistance, mortgage terms. They're going to invest in small business lending, and they're going to invest in supplier diversity, who do they contract with, and CDFI. So they're sort of, if you look at all those billions of dollars, those are the 4 areas they're talking about investing in, where they're using the language of racial equity, right? The idea of disproportionate and we're needing to invest. But let me just frame that in that, okay, so that sounds like a lot of money, right? So JP Morgan, $30 billion over 5 years, about $6 billion a year. JP Morgan made, I want to say, yeah, they made 30 billion just last year alone. Just in 1 year, they made that amount of money. So if you look since the Trump administration, this probably represents about a 3 to 4% of all the profits that they've made. So, it's one thing to say, $30 billion over 5 years. Another say, yeah, we're of the profits that we've made, we're going to give you somewhere between 3 and 5%. Kind of puts it in perspective, right, of the investment that they're making in our communities. And in the areas, so, and let's not, when we sort of look at it, and as Robin points out, when we sit with the big banks, and we have an annual convening, we bring the community together, and, they bring all their managing directors and they fly them in from all over, we're asking for accountability. And so when I see that they say, we're going to put these billions of dollars into a racial equity investment, I want to know who's holding accountable. So, and they said, oh, we're pulling together a senior leadership. Okay, who's in that room? Are the people of color in that room? Because if you just have all white men sitting around a table talking about how we're going to help them, I'm not sure that that's accountability. But that second portion that they put in there is that they said, okay, we will have a community advisory. And so it's important that we know who's on that community advisory, so we know who we are being represented. So that's the first component when we see these billions of dollars being otherwise invested. So the 3 things that also come out of it, which, the dollars are great, but we also realize that when they make a small business loan, a home mortgage loan, that's still a profit model. They're still earning fees on that, right? That mortgage loan is going to have fees that the banks get, and is there an accommodation in the terms of the loan? So you can give me, a home loan and say, I'm going to charge you 3%, and then somebody with good credit or otherwise in a privileged community is getting 1.5%. Like, the terms matter, right? So the way that the money is going to be distributed or engaged matters. And so I just want you all to think about when you're hopefully, eligible for these small business loans or for these CDFI, like, get into the details. Are you charging communities of color the same terms? Is it the same rate? Is it the same fees, or are they elevated? Because why? Because they'll say more risk. And then if you say, well, why is it more risk? Because of the policies that have put us into segregated communities, and we can go into that. I won't go too long. But so it's not without its profit. So if you sit here and you say, oh, I'm going to put 3 to 5% of our annual net profit Well, I'm still earning fees, I'm still earning interest, and I'm still doing my business as usual. So I'm just not quite sure how magnanimous this sort of proposition of these billions of dollars. And then lastly, it's the enforceability, accountability and enforceability. Can we then demand the terms that we think we need at this time in fact, close the racial wealth gap? If you're going to start with saying we're going to help you close the racial wealth gap, then you need to start with a number. You need to tell me right now, this represents, like I said, 20% of the Black communities in poverty. We are going to lower that, and we're going to increase the household wealth, which means, my assets minus my liabilities is my household wealth. So you better help me on debt, and you better be talking about how you're going to close those gaps, so then we can see if there's movement. Because they can pour these numbers in, wait for the moment to pass, right? Okay, now there's, look at the election alone. It's telling you something about 50% of the country feels like, it's fine to be racist and sort of speak in racialized terms. And if the moment passes, then, the disinvestment will continue, the wealth gap will grow, and we really won't be in conversation any longer. So I think this is, the moment that people are saying has to be a movement. And I think in particular, Black-owned businesses, home ownership, and the discussion around wealth needs to happen. And you guys are the wintertime soldiers, right? It's the work that this group and the chambers and the Black businesses will be doing in order to take advantage and actually close the racial wealth gap and the income gap as well. So I could go on a bit more. The other component that I would tease out with you is that the capital markets, as they try to frame it, is about power, right? We're talking about the power to even make these decisions of how many billions of dollars go where and where are they invested. A discussion around power of keeping Black dollars in our community, and is that realistic? We're talking about power that, for some reason, when we need the invisible hand of the capital markets, it applies to us. But boy, when they need a bailout, or when we subsidize certain markets, then the invisible hand of capitalism doesn't work. So, if we can have discussions about capital, and what that means for us in the community, power, and what that means, and define some of these terms that are too quickly to be called socialism, right? That's the boogeyman word right now. If you want to talk about shared power, if you want to talk about real capital and the use of capital, you're a socialist. Well, let's just talk about capitalism, because what we have right now isn't capitalism, right? Capitalism isn't when the Fed pours trillions of dollars into the capital markets to hold them up. And you see that in the stock market. Capitalism isn't these subsidies. Capitalism isn't redlined communities. So let's have this opportunity to define what we believe will be those things that help us.
Debra, you've laid a wonderful framework and given us some excellent food for thought. We wanted to kind of lean back a little bit on what does when we look at all these propositions that just were on the ballot, and some of the folks who are actually winning. You guys are in Northern California, we're in Southern California. If you can kind of jump into that a little bit, and then we're going to have some questions that are in our chat box that we want to get to as well.
Yeah, the proposition, so Greenlining, we were focused on those things that were racial equity. We were particularly supportive of Prop 15 and 16. So 16 was the affirmative action for public dollars. It tended to get boiled down into an admissions question, because education, right? And but the public dollars in getting hired, because the state government is the largest employer in the country, and the public dollars as it's spent. So Prop 16 was about being able to just use a racial lens and a gender lens. So that's what's so fascinating to me, that this applied to women, that women could be considered, that just checking that I'm a female could be considered for me being faculty, tenured faculty at the in the UC system or the CSU system. And you know, we're 51% of the state and said, no, we shouldn't consider. When we know all the data says that women are not being considered for faculty positions, we're not being considered for large public agency leadership positions. So we were really fighting because of the economic impact of the public dollars on Prop 16. Prop 15, you know, was sort of a bit of the reversal on Prop 13, where they defunded schools, and that had a particularly racialized lens. So both of those failed, right? And 15 was a little closer, but man, Prop 16 just, I think it was like 44 to 56, 44% said no to it, which is an interesting, right? That tells us something about how they view the opportunity. And I would say the argument is it's a level playing field. We're colorblind, but the data, you just look at all the data, and the data says disproportionately that we are being disenfranchised and not given opportunity, and the numbers are shrinking. So those two, Prop 15 and 16, were sort of the racial. And then I'd say the others were a bit more, we did also weigh in on the criminal justice, right? So the parole, the felony, so Prop 17, the ability to vote while you have a felony. So that passed, we're excited about that. I'm trying to find the other, Prop 20 failed, and that was reclassifying misdemeanors to felonies. So we're glad that failed, right? That was more of the mass incarceration. That was a proposition to say, oh, if you have these misdemeanors, you're now gonna have felony, and then the felonies are, anyway, so the criminal justice system on 20, we're glad that one failed. And I'd say the last, and then the Prop 25 was the money bail system, and that also failed, and cash bail, that also failed. So I think those are the top ones at Greenlining we were tracking. Of course, I think the Prop 21, which was the rental affordability, that was to allow cities the ability to implement rent control. It wasn't mandatory, and that's why it's so interesting. We have this tremendous homelessness problem in California, and here comes a proposition to allow cities permission, not mandate that you have to do rent control, but here's a tactic that you can do, and it goes down in flames. 60% voted against rent control or Rent Affordability Act. So I think all of those have economic impacts, have racial impacts, because, again, the data would show the majority of homelessness, and especially in LA, is Black men in particular are, and here's an attempt at least trying to provide some affordable housing that just went down in flames.
So we will pivot a little bit, and I'm going to ask Crystal to ask her first question, and I have another question from the chat box as well.
Yeah, that's something else. First question is, where do we go next on the Prop 16 for affirmative action? It was 16, right? It was 15, 16. And then John has a question, and his question is, what incentive do you think large financial institutes have to work with the Black community outside of the fact that we're currently cool and in support of Black lives? We're like the flavor of the month right now. So what is the incentive beyond that? And I would call that white guilt. So what happens when white guilt dries up? What do we do from there?
Yeah, so let me try the easy one first. So we have been, gosh, I'd say since the beginning of the year, when we were working with Opportunity for All on Prop 16, we were also asking the governor for an Office of Racial Equity, that there be a gubernatorial office, just like there's the Office of Business Management and there's the Office of Environment. We were asking for that be a staffed position in the governor's office that is dedicated to looking at all these, the way we spend our money. And so really, put a governance and an oversight. And then the second track to that is a pre-clearance on racial equity legislation. So if you're going to propose a bill, or if you're going to, an assembly bill, a Senate bill, and all of these, that there be a pre-clearance that you have to assess your bill on the impact of communities of color, right? So that and in fact, we build into our system a way that somebody is evaluating, and that we're not just after the fact saying, oh, wow, that really hurt a lot of Black communities, or that hurt, the immigrant community or the gay and lesbian community, that we have that pre-clearance sort of as a tactic. So I think you're going to see, we're in coalition on that, and we'll probably call you all to the table and say, look, here's how we think we can get a second pass at some sort of an affirmative way to look at their racial equity. I think holding banks accountable, I do think it's going to take this inside-outside power. So the outside power has been protests, right? Have been the fact that people have been willing to peacefully protest and make their voice heard. And I do think there is, because Greenlining was founded in going and sitting in at banks and having the community just hold our elected officials accountable on sort of this banking system. And then that's the outside power. And then the inside power is that we got to be in conversations with the banks. We request annual meetings, and which we do now. And the meetings have to be with the C-suite folks. They'll tend to want to send a regional person, or it's where we demand to speak to those in the highest authority. And I think it's still very shameful if you sit with a bank and say, next year sometime, and we look at the first 50 billion that's come out across the top 3 banks, and the dial has not moved at all. In fact, the wealth gap has become larger. Then we hold them accountable with the inside power along with the outside power. So I think that, it is a time where the banks are in fact having an awakening too. It's kind of hard to go in reverse, I think, if you're a bank that's holding all these public goods. And I think that we have to propose options, nothing like a good capital option to get them to reconsider. I think it's time to think about a public bank in terms of, we used to use, and this is very common now, conversation, especially a Professor Baranadan, who's in UC Irving, I think, has talked about postal banking, and that because the incentive is not profit, it's community. And if you think about the big banks, they've pulled out the brick and mortars so that we cannot even go to a bank. And for those of us who are low income, we can't afford the fees. If I have a balance of, I think it's like even lower now. It used to be 2,500, but now I think it's 1,800. If your balance is lower than that, then you have to pay for them to hold your money. You have to pay for you to pay your bills. And so we've got a whole percent of our population that's managing their lives through cash. And that's why they're going to the predatory lenders, because I would rather pay my 10%, up front, or even if I have to take out an emergency loan at some exorbitant amount, but I'd rather than have my checking account not clear my checks and then charge me a fee for not clearing my checks and call that banking?
Yeah.
So, so it's like, and boy, I bet you if you put that postal banking option and do it in conjunction with the Federal Reserve, who's also not incentivized for a profit, you might scare the banks to keep them at the table and to get them to modify the way they do banking.
That's good stuff.
I think that's excellent, because I always found that banks have a habit of clearing your expenses that are coming out, the debits that are coming out before they actually apply the credits. So that way they can charge you a fee. And they always put the largest debit, knowing that that will wipe out whatever the balance is. So I always thought that was very predatory.
Yeah.
So we have another question from Lamont Gibson. How the cost of healthcare being addressed in the altruism of banking, the banking industry? How are the costs of healthcare being addressed?
I don't think, well, I have not seen this direct impact or direct. I have seen where the healthcare industry, so for example, for us, Kaiser is a big, Sutter Health is also big, and they have created partnerships with the banks to then invest in either some sort of initiative here in Oakland. In fact, I'll be on a call at 1 o'clock where we'll be talking about how to rescue or otherwise resuscitate some of the small businesses. And we have Kaiser at the table, and we have JP Morgan Chase at the table, and we have some other partners. We have elected, officials at the table. So that's how I see banks of trying to come into the healthcare space. It's not a, I think the recognition is that the social determinants of health, right? So if you talk about health equity, that your health is predicated on, where you live, what's your job, family history, ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, that those social determinants of health, if you deal with those, you will deal with healthcare. Mm-hmm. So if I'm in a healthier community, if I'm not in a food desert, and then I will be more healthy, and for them that'll lower health costs. But it's all combined. I can't just treat you as an individual because you have a family history of diabetes and high blood pressure and then throw you back into a stressful community, right? So I think they're trying to do the whole, if the social determinants of health are economically linked, then can we solve those together? Okay. And I think we have to make that argument that, don't isolate my financial and economic experience from my health experience because they're in fact linked.
I have this big thing about siloing activity. And when you silo activity, then people can make excuses. They can lean on the fact that I haven't spoken to that department or I haven't engaged that individual. And I say to myself, especially coming out of banking, where things were so siloed, that's critical, that there's this interconnection between these layers that are operating. We have another question here from Greg Steed. What can be done to get Proposition 16 on the ballot again for next year and have it worded in a way that better describes what it does? And I think that before I leave you with that, I think that this year in particular has created a level of engagement that we haven't seen in a long time from our community at all levels. And I think that too, these young people are no longer taking what we say, they are actively engaged in what is going on. And that's the excitement part to me. That's why I'm trying to stay relevant and stay connected to them. So if you can address that, your thoughts there.
Yeah, I think, so we've not met, the big coalition has not met yet on debriefing, but I think fundamentally what maybe the opposition has been able to do is make the words affirmative action a dirty word, right? That they have co-opted the term to somehow mean all the terms, reverse discrimination, quotas. So the ability to co-opt a term is also something to be addressed. And it also is so, the conversation around Prop 16 and our public assets is so centered around forgetting our past. Like, it is so key that you forget, all the way that the public goods have been used against Black folks. Like, you have to have amnesia to be able to say, well, y'all are where you're at because you did it, right? That the rugged individualism is why Black folks have not been able to buy homes, is why we're unbanked, is why we see job discrimination. So somehow, you got to forget that history in order to say, and I have a better way to move California forward. I think you have to incorporate that history and remind folks of why we are here.
Mhm.
How did we get here?
Mhm.
And then make the opposition come to the table and explain how we are here. I was real quick story. So I was in one of these discussions with a woman who was adamant that, the UC admission, she had data, the numbers had actually gone up for Black folks and all this other stuff. And that, it was really going to hurt the Asian population because they were not going to be admitted as well. And so I was like, okay, if you want to have the conversation about sort of this bias in admissions, then talk to me why you're okay with the legacy admissions, right? If my mom went, my grandmother went, my great grandmother went, this legacy admissions, that's a side door. And then the donation and gift, that's a side door. That in fact you're just wanting to single out this race part of admissions when in fact there's a broader admissions issues into universities. And there's just no answer for that because you have to talk about, you're isolating, and then that in fact shows your biases around race, because you would address the legacy admissions, you would address the donation admissions, and you would address these other issues. So I just think that, and then you talk about the legacy of, if you, even that, we started HBCUs because we were not allowed admissions into colleges and universities. So if you go back and say, okay, what about all the years where we couldn't even go to college? Can we, oh, no, it's equal, it's all fair now. It's like, so either you have to be thinking about, the harm and a conversation about healing and restitution, or you're not having an honest conversation. And I think the opposition has been really successful to say, none of that harm, it doesn't matter anymore. That you all got to just live with that and you got to move forward. They really have captured that side of the argument. And so much so that, women and other people of color, are voting against self-interest.
But it's so interesting, Debra, you say that, because when you look at the LGBTQ community, when you like the Asian community, and in some aspect, the Hispanic community, they will talk about their history and past as it applies to racism, and how even they do this themselves, how there's systemic barriers for them. But when we talk about it for Black people, we get the pushback and want us to forget that. But the Jewish community doesn't have to forget the Holocaust. The Japanese don't have to, the encampments. And moving forward, the Hispanic community will not have to forget the fact that they took their children away from them, but it always comes back. So I guess my question is, we definitely know there's strategic planning on their side to put the barriers in place for us. What is the strategic planning that we can do as a whole, more voices, that we can move this needle, or at least to be able to counteract what we already know how they're going to answer and how they're going to react?
Yeah, I think we gotta stay in. Oh, there's a bit of feedback. Sorry. We gotta stay in solidarity. We just, if you can divide us into, sort of Black Lives Matter, and I don't want to be part of that, or the business community, and I don't want to be part of that, or the homeless community, and like the solidarity is what's going to carry us through. And it usually does not take a majority. It takes a few folks, right? If you look at all the significant movements, be it the women's suffrage, be it the LGBTQ, be it even the civil rights, right? It was always a core few folks who did that work. And the same, happened with Prop 16. It was ACA 5, and that was like 2.5, 3 years in the making. So it only takes a small group of folks to sort of put together the platform, and it's really, if you've not being involved in some of the Black economic plans and the Black recovery that some of these movements are doing, get yourself educated and informed, and it's going to just take a few folks to move the dial.
Okay. Any other questions? Stephen, anyone? Oh, John, you have any other questions?
Manita had
Okay,
a comment. She said in 2019, banks with assets of $1 billion or more charged clients $11.6 billion in overdraft fees. And these fees included both overdraft fees as well as non-sufficient funds. So again, the debt continues to get stacked. And I agree with you, and I agree with what Crystal is saying, that my personal opinion is that we need to be more consistent. We need to consistently create these platforms and these solidarity relationships in order to get the needle moved and consistently. Lamont also made a comment, there are costs associated directly with the cost of healthcare. Treatment must include addressing social deterrence, which is what you responded to as well. John Davis has another question. Anything else we should be thinking about in LA when it comes to racial equity?
Oh gosh. So if we think about the four pillars that even I would say recognizes, right, that it be intergenerational. There's something to be said there. Don't buy the argument that we need more financial education. That is just, and I love the people doing the work. I especially love My Path as an organization. But the idea that we need, when somebody says, let's do more financial education, I would argue that Black folks can stretch a nickel further than anybody else. So it's not, but we don't need more financial education, right? Those, people who are in the low income, poverty levels, I mean, they are so creative about how they're using it. So that is a panacea to say y'all can't manage your money. And that then gets internalized. So I would definitely say that the alarm bells should go off. Somebody says, oh, let's do financial education, it should just go ding, 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 because you're trying to then put the blame back on Black folk. So I think that for sure. I think there should be, LA, you all are getting pretty progressive as it relates to environmental issues and homelessness issues. I think we need to just ask boldly what it is we want to see and what we think needs to be done. I think if we, again, intergenerational wealth, making sure we're taking care of our elders, and not letting economically, if we need to ask for a program, a bailout for our elders. Look, white folks would be doing that. They would be figuring out bailout structures. So I think if you're talking intergenerational, I think we need to figure out how to help our elders. Home ownership, I think that for sure, if you're paying rent somewhere, you might as well pay rent to a place where you can own that property. And then that would speak to some sort of, and this is where, it gets really, for me, aggressive, some sort of reparation for having redlined me out of a community. Mm-hmm. And if all I can afford, right, we're perpetuating, if all I can afford is something that is in a Black neighborhood or a Latinx neighborhood or a low income neighborhood, then the evaluations of those, the assessments, right, of those properties either have to be, you are subsidizing my real estate taxes, or you're increasing the value of those properties. That the bank just does it on the books, that this community was damaged. The same community across the freeway, their house is 200,000 and their house is $1 million. We will inflate the asset value to $1 million. And then that allows me to do a small business loan, allows me to put my kids through college, allows me to pay my health care, right? That we ask for in the shape of that home ownership. And then our small businesses, the credit, low worthiness of the credit, they just need to suspend all that drama. I mean, they use the argument of too big to fail, and my argument is we're too many to fail. At some point, it's too many folks that are just going to fail under the current banking structure that is really around power and controlling the assets and the wealth of people of color. So those three, big components is what we can really ask of the banks. And we may not land on that, but boy, if I'm gonna ask you for something really big, you're probably gonna give me something a little smaller. And maybe that smaller is more than what we got now. So that's why I'm always I'm gonna ask for something because of the harm, the recognition of the harm and healing that needs to be done.
Oh, and very, very valid point. And I like the idea of the reparations for home ownership, because of redlining. I live in North Inglewood, and when I've been in my house 40 years, and now because the Anglo folks are really moving in, now it's called La Tijera Village, And so again, when they show up with a plan. And I think that John made a very valid point in that what kind of plan we need to put together a plan, and we need to work on that plan. We need to start, coalescing these ideas so that when the opportunity becomes available, we can. Marcel had let's see here. Marcel had a comment. We can stretch a nickel and get by with limited funds, but many people cannot project revenues and expenses or manage cash flow in business. That financial training is much needed. I don't call that financial training. I call that business literacy.
Yeah.
Business literacy is different than financial literacy. Financial literacy to me should start in the 5th grade, so that by the time they get to high school and they get their first job and all of that, they're starting to think budgets and expenses and what all they have to pay for. But business literacy has to be an ongoing thing, because to her point, most people don't know how to project or manage their cash flow in their business. They know how to work in the business, but not on the business. That's always my comment. And then I have Colette from Pacific Coast Regional. We did see a gap with small businesses about financial education as it came to preparedness for lending. Do you think more business education can help minimize the bank expense excuses? No question. I'm answering that question. But we'll leave that up to our guests.
Well, so I think this is a question about PPP, right? A couple of things happened. One, you had to have a banking relationship. So if you don't have a banking relationship, it was really hard to apply, because if you went to, B of A, they first of all were going to take care of their largest customers, or their largest clients first, and then they didn't even hardly get to the small businesses in the first round, right? And that first round of PPP was gone in like 10 days. So I would argue that wasn't even an education. That was just straight up access. And you had to do it all online. So if you didn't have broadband, and if you didn't have all the paperwork, so you had to have, the 3 months, and I know this because I applied, and then I helped a whole bunch of small businesses, Oakland, try to apply. Just getting the paperwork together to submit so that you could qualify, because it came through the SBA agency, right? So that wasn't necessarily that somebody didn't have financial literacy or business. That was literally a process that you had to go through. That is where the banks figured out that they were pitiful at. They weren't able to even be the service center. They couldn't even take the calls for somebody to say, I'm trying to upload this document, or is this what you mean? They had no customer service ability for businesses of color and small businesses. It for the loans, I think the cutoff was somewhere around $250,000 to $350,000 for PPP and up. Well, most, small businesses only needed 30 to 40,000 to make the payroll so they could keep the doors open. The banks were like, we don't know how to, we don't want to support that small amount, because why? Because the same fee that I get for making a $500,000 loan is the same fee I get for making a $50,000 loan. And so they're just like, they're not incentivized to do PPP for the small businesses. And then that's where we can have an apparatus. Look, this ain't gonna be the last crisis.
Right,
we can have an
exactly.
apparatus in place that says, here's the safety net services. And it's set up by our elected officials, our city halls, it's funded by the banks. And then when the crisis happens, small businesses come here. Because you ought to run your business, and then we're asking you to manage your business during a crisis. So So I would make the argument that, you know, in this time of crisis, that's when we should also have a sort of a plan to say, look, we're turning this switch on. We now in crisis, you know, it's fires, it's, you know, earthquakes, it's pandemics. We're turning that switch on, and we built that thing 3 years ago. And now the small, literally the small business sole proprietors, 5 to 10 employees are good to go with getting access to capital.
And Debra, you know, when you talked earlier, and it's a question on how do we reframe or restructure how we reach out to the banks. So the banks are all come to us with these lovely dollar amounts, but when we've had them here on this with the program, you know, it's vague. Right. Okay, we're going to do it to home lending. We're going to do it to this and this. But then it's like, okay, when is this going to take? Well, we haven't worked out those details. So we've actually even said, are they talking to us to ask what we really need, or is this generically? And then how do we restructure, or how do we speak to them to say, hey, sit down with us and we can tell you what the real problems are, and this is what we need and the help we need? Is that a possibility for us to do that with, especially these banks that are coming to us with all of these lovely amounts? I know Wells Fargo has toted that 175 million since 2012, and we've never made them accountable. So I have not seen I have not seen that distributed into our communities.
Yeah. We have to stay in conversation and in contact. And I think that's when our elected officials, right, that we can leverage, look, we got some power base in California, right? So we've got Maxine Waters, who's the head of the finance committee. We have testified in front of, but if we're in partnership with Maxine, and, you know, Nancy Pelosi is in California, and now we may have the vice president in California, like we should be setting up those relationships, because not even those relationships, the accountability and the plan, because when they pick up the phone at the same time that we're picking up the phone, and we then say, okay, you are either going to meet with the Southern California folks and the Northern California folks and the Central California, you're going to meet with these people, or we're going to put a ban on your being able to bank in California. Right, we're like, right, the 6th largest economy in the world, and so now can we actually ban banks from? No, but we could charge them extra fees. We could tax them. We could do, you know, a lot of things from a policy perspective that's going to force them to the table. But we got to do our work with our electeds to say, you know, are you with me on this? And how can we then have this leverage to be able to have the conversations, for sure. It is policy. Policy is what, you know, the FHA was a policy, redlining was a policy. Those are, you know, veterans, VA benefits, policy. None of that was intentional. White men, you know, they weren't even including white women, for crying out loud. Those are intentional policies that they're able to do. And even when we see the bailouts, it's going to be a policy-driven sort of centered thing.
When I looked at the, and I strongly recommend you guys take a look at the Greenlining website and look at the reports that they have there and look at the organizations that they work with. I think that this is an organization that we collectively should stay connected to, because I think there's power in numbers. One of the comments, you moved your summit this year into a virtual space, which was interesting to me. But John Powell said something that I thought was really, really powerful. When he talked about, you know, everyone is telling everybody to wash their hands. And he said 35% of the Navajo Nation has no running water, right? But what he said was what I really, really love: social, and I would say equitable solidarity is justice, and is justice. Justice is the public face of love, right? So I think that when we talk about holding these people accountable, holding these organizations accountable, competition is king. So if we illuminate the folks who are doing a decent job, you know, put out a scorecard, which is what Greenlining does.
We do.
You put out a scorecard and you list them based on a stacking order. Nobody wants to be in the bottom third. Nobody wants to be on the bottom third. So I think that that may be something that our group here in Southern California, we may need to take a look at. And, you know, we want to applaud the folks who are supporting what we're doing, who are supporting the efforts of solidarity and equitable business relations. And at the same time, too, we have to eliminate those folks who've made promises that they have yet to keep. And one of the other things that I will say that you guys may not be aware of, she mentioned this, and I want you to understand this. Whenever Greenlining holds these adjudication meetings, it is the C-suite that's there.
Yeah.
We're talking board presidents, we're talking to CEOs, CFOs, you know, all of the C folks are there. Some SVPs, I mean, some EVPs, but primarily the C-suite. So again, I think that if we can model what we want to do in our community down here against what they're doing and work with that organization and really create that scorecard. And to your point, bring our elected officials to the table. And, you know, our county board of supervisors is going to be all women. I'm just saying.
So Debra, how do we help you? How do we, can the community get involved with Greenlining Institute, and how do we help you? That in turn will help us.
Yeah, for sure. So we are in touch with the chambers, but now that we'll invite you to all of these meetings. Now that they're virtual, they're a little easier. They're easier for us to gather. It's so much harder to get the banks. Yeah. We're like, well, you don't have to fly out here now. Oh, we'll get back to you. Oh, we're working on some stuff. So, we'll just stay in connection, you know, and I would say to the folks, especially as it relates to your business associations, you know, seek them out. Don't try to survive this on your own. I mean, it's such a treacherous landscape to try to sustain and start a business, and it's these kinds of efforts where we stay connected that it's going to allow us, when we, you know, start to talk about recovery and we start to talk about what this change looks like. It's going to come from conversations like this, right? It's going to come from folks like, I may not have my PhD in economics, but I know what my community needs. You know, I know what a Black business needs right now. I know what I need, you know, and so that voice is important. So yeah, then that's why I was happy to take the call with Stephen, that we will keep you guys informed, and we will bring topics to the table. And, we rarely put out, in fact, I don't think we don't put out any publications or research without having met in coalition. So we will be in touch.
Well, awesome. You have been fantastic, and we're so appreciative for you to bring the information to us. And that's the purpose of this channel and this network, is to bring information that we wouldn't otherwise have accessibility to do. So thank you so much. For everyone, this recording will be sent to you. Please share it. And we have a couple of accounts. We have Dexter McLeod, that's from LA South Chamber. Linda Morgan Sams is on here. We want to all work together. That's the one thing that if I'm taking takeaways, is that a small group of people can make a change, that we have to do it in solidarity, and there has to be consistency, and we should make our politicians who are all back into office, or being elected back into office, accountable, and we need to be in their faces to make change for our community. So we want to thank you guys. You guys will receive also, this is an upcoming event. Recycling Black Dollars is having a Black family reunited. We haven't had our breakfast mixers, obviously, since February. So on November 17th, we're coming together online, virtually. And so I'll send out the invitation. It's free of charge for everyone. We want you to share. We want to uplift each other and inspire each other to move forward. And RBD will be making a big announcement about our resource guide. We are about to put it on steroids, and we want everybody to have their businesses listed in the Black Business Resource Guide, RBD Resource Guide. We are a collaborative effort with the Los Angeles Urban League and Recycling Black Dollars. I believe that we should collaborate, so I put my best foot forward. And so we would love for you guys to come out to do that. And let's we got to get through this, and we got to do this together. So thank you so much, Deborah. Thank you, Robin. Thank all the new bodies that came. Please come back and please tell everybody this is a great place to hang out on Thursday morning at 11 a.m. before lunch.
And guys, make sure you check the chat box, because PCR has some additional updates about the PPE, free PPE, and also too about some other funding that's going to be coming up with a short deadline.
Yes.
Okay.
And I'll send you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you. I will send out the listing today. All right, Deborah,
Nice
thank
to
you.
meet everybody. Thank you
I
so
will
much.
send out the chat and the recording later this afternoon, so that because some of this stuff has some time dates on it, and then you can also see some of the other questions that we didn't get to. So thank you guys. Have a great weekend. Be safe. Let's get our elected president-elect in the office, hopefully by tomorrow, or at least by Friday, we'll know who our new leadership is. So thank you guys. Have a great one. Be safe. Wear your mask.
All right. Thank you, Crystal.